This is the footage I never wanted to report, but the world needs to see it. The most terrifying, clear Bigfoot sighting ever caught on camera. I went in expecting silence and came out with proof of something horrifying stalking that mountain. Once you see how clear this footage of Bigfoot really is, you'll understand why I haven't been the same since. A classified geothermal basin in Cascade Range, Washington State. 10:50 at night in September, and the thermal camera on my hip is still recording because that footage is the only reason anyone believes a word I am about to tell you. I am Dr. Maya Tanaka, a volcanologist, and before that night, I did not believe in Bigfoot either. None of us knew yet that this same camera would end up capturing more than any of us could survive remembering. The basin itself should have warned us. A 2,000-acre geothermal basin was full of unstable fissures and boiling mud. During the team's first night, a seismic sensor detected heavy, rhythmic footsteps crossing a mud flat that should not have supported any weight. The camera captured only a blur and a strange footprint, but the team dismissed it as equipment drift rather than admit they might have recorded Bigfoot. That blurry half-second of motion was nothing next to the frame waiting for us at the very bottom of the card. I was crouched over a fissure with a gas sampler in my hand on the second night when the wood knock came. Not a branch snapping, a deliberate hollow strike, like something the size of a refrigerator had swung a limb against a 100-year-old pine trunk. My colleague Sarah swung her headlamp toward the tree line, and there was nothing there. That is the thing about Bigfoot. It lets you look first and see nothing before it decides you are allowed to see it. For a full minute after the knock, nothing moved. Sarah kept her light trained on the black wall of pines, and I felt the specific dread of knowing something was watching that light without stepping into it. My hip cam kept recording the whole time, and later, when I slowed that footage down frame by frame, I found what none of us saw live. 2 seconds of a pale shape ghosting between two trunks, low to the ground, gone before the next frame. Something out there had already been close enough to touch the beam of Sarah's flashlight, and none of us had known it. The worst part was that there was nowhere else to look. Every tree trunk looked the same. Every patch of darkness seemed deep enough to hide a body, and the beam from Sarah's flashlight only made the surrounding forest look darker. I wanted to tell her to turn it off, but I couldn't make myself speak. Somewhere beyond the reach of that light, Bigfoot had already decided we were worth watching. And whatever it wasn't in any hurry to come closer. The ground shuddered under my boots 2 seconds later. I felt it before I heard it. A low-frequency thump that traveled through the crust of the basin, and every mud pot in a 100-yard radius rippled at once. Something the size of a delivery truck peeled itself away from the pines above the valley. It did not run at us. It walked, calm and enormous, straight onto the thin crust that should have cracked and dropped it into scalding sediment. It did not sink 1 inch. 9 feet of matted, dark fur, shoulders wider than any bear I had ever measured, moving across ground that had swallowed a 200-pound survey drone the week before. My hip cam caught every second of it in full, unbroken, daylight clear resolution. The first time any of us had it dead center in frame instead of at the edge. That was the moment I understood we had something no one had ever filmed before. But even as I stood there staring at the display, some part of my brain was already certain this would not be the clearest footage I walked away with that night. Sarah froze. I did not blame her. Bigfoot does not move like an animal that is afraid of you. And that absence of fear is its own kind of horror. It bent down without hurrying, wrapped one hand around a boulder the size of a washing machine, and threw it through our portable generator like the metal casing was cardboard. Sparks went up, the valley lights died, and Sarah finally ran. I stood there for another second, camera still up, trying to keep the frame steady on it instead of running myself, because some instinct told me the footage mattered as much as my own legs did. Without the generator, there was nothing left between us and the forest except our flashlights, and whatever the cameras could still see in the dark, and mine was already shaking so badly, that the beam jumped across the trees. The lens kept rolling, unaware it was building toward a shot none of us were anywhere near ready to see. She did not get 10 yards. Bigfoot did not chase her, because it did not need to. It planted one enormous foot in front of her path and stomped once, and the crust under her feet spiderwebbed and gave way. My hip cam caught the whole thing from 30 feet back in a shot clear enough that investigators later used it frame by frame. I watched the mud open like a mouth. Scalding gray slurry, 200 degrees at minimum, swallowed her to the thighs before she even finished screaming. She clawed at the hardened rim, and it crumbled in her hands. Chunks of baked crust breaking off and sinking with her. She tried to throw herself sideways onto solid ground, and for 1 second her fingers actually caught rock tendons standing out along her forearm before the suction of the mud pulled her back to the waist. Bigfoot did not touch her. It stood at the edge of the pool, arms loose at its sides, and watched her cook in ground temperature mud while steam rolled off her skin in visible waves. And on the recording, if you watch closely, its head never once turns toward Sarah in her final seconds. It is turned toward my camera. Her screaming went ragged, then wet, then stopped being words at all. Then it turned all the way around, walked straight into an active geyser vent blasting 212-degree steam, and vanished inside the cloud without so much as a flinch. Bigfoot used boiling water as a curtain, and it did not so much as blink walking through it. I grabbed a seismic laptop off the folding table because some idiot instinct told me the data mattered more than my legs, and I ran, hip cam still rolling, still pointed back over my shoulder, more often than it was pointed at the trail in front of me. My boots punched through crust twice on the way out, ankle deep both times, hot enough through the leather to make me scream and keep moving anyway. I do not remember most of that run. I remember the cold hitting my lungs like knives after the heat of the basin. And I remember looking back once, camera still recording. There at the edge of the tree line, I saw nothing behind me, which was somehow worse than seeing something. Bigfoot does not always let you see it coming. Sometimes it lets the not knowing do the work, and the half mile through those trees felt longer than the entire drive up the mountain had. Ranger Station 7 sat half a mile up a service road, a squat concrete bunker with a radio mast and reinforced shutters built back when the Forest Service still worried about erupting instead of whatever this was. I hit the door with both fists and screamed until Ranger Carter hauled it open and pulled me inside. 50 years old, gray beard, the kind of face that had already seen something on this mountain decades before I was born. He took one look at the melted plastic residue on my sleeve and went pale in a way that told me he already knew what had done it. Ranger Kelly, 29, ex-military, had a rifle off the rack before I finished my second sentence. Ranger Park, 40, was already at the console pulling up thermal feeds, hands steady even though her voice was not. Behind them, the station's shutters were already bolted. 3 inches of steel plating over every window, installed decades earlier for reasons nobody had ever fully explained to the newer staff. I told them everything. The wood knock, the crust that would not break it under, Sarah in the mud, the steam, and Carter notices the creature deliberately drove the narrator into the mud and used the heat as a weapon. Reviewing the footage, he spots it staring directly at the narrator's hip camera for a full second. Meanwhile, thermal footage reveals massive footprints moving calmly beneath scalding hot springs, suggesting Bigfoot can traverse the dangerous water and may have deliberately passed beneath the camera knowing it was there. Even that trail, glowing and unmistakable, was only a rehearsal for the close-up still waiting on the card. What the clip does not show is the sound that came through Park's headset at the same moment. A low, rolling hum under the water that none of our equipment had a name for, and how fast Park's hand went for the volume dial to cut it off before it filled the whole station. What the clip also does not show, because none of us noticed it until much later, is that the hum rose and fell in a rhythm that matched, almost beat for beat, the wood knock from 2 nights earlier, as if the same signal was being sent 2 different ways. That was when the radio crackled. Sarah's voice came through the static, flat and hollow. in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. She said the heat was not so bad once you stopped fighting it, that it was almost peaceful now. The pitch was hers exactly, the small rasp she always had after a cigarette, but there was no breath behind it, no pause where a living throat would need air. Carter grabbed the mic and demanded to know who was on the channel, and the voice on the other end did not answer him directly. Instead, it repeated word for word in Kelly's own voice, something Kelly had said into that same radio less than an hour earlier while running the thermal feed. Kelly went white and killed the radio power entirely, and the silence that followed was somehow louder than the static had been. Whatever was on that channel had not just heard Sarah die close enough to catch the exact grain of her voice.
It had been listening to every one of us the entire time we thought we were alone inside a locked concrete room, and it wanted us to know it.
Park broke the silence first, saying the seismic pulses on her screen were not random at all, that they were rhythmic, deliberate thumps rolling up from directly beneath the station, matching the hum from the hot springs and the wood knock pattern from 2 nights before. 3 different signals that were somehow the same signal. Something enormous was walking in slow circles under our feet, testing the foundation the way you test ice before you step on it, and every camera we had pointed the wrong direction to catch it doing it. The lights flickered twice and died. When the backup generator kicked the bulbs back on, the rear wall of the station was already caved in, concrete blocks scattered like teeth across the floor, and Bigfoot was standing in the gap where the wall used to be, ducked low to fit under the ceiling joists, fur steaming faintly from whatever vent it had climbed through to get there. The console camera caught the breach on tape, and on that recording, its head turns toward the lens mounted above the door before it ever looks at any of us standing in the room. Park did not even have time to turn around before one swing of its arm caught her across the torso and sent her through the broken wall, dragging her out into the snow by the ankle before any of us reached the opening. Kelly fired 3 rounds from the rifle, center mass, and I watched every bullet strike home and do nothing. They pinged off muscle packed under matted fur, thick enough to stop them cold, and 1 round ricocheted off its shoulder and buried itself in the doorframe 6 inches from my head. Bigfoot barely bled. It turned its head toward Kelly with eyes that held something ancient and calculating, nothing like an animal's blank stare.
And for a moment, I thought it was going to close the distance and take the rifle too.
Instead, it bent, wrapped one hand around Park's leg, and carried her toward the nearest mud pool while she was still fighting, still clawing at the snow, and dropped her in.
I will never forget how it stood there afterward, because the console camera caught that too.
Hot enough to blister paint off the exterior wall behind it, and it did not so much as squint. It watched the pool with the patience of something that had done this 1,000 times before, head tilted slightly, almost curious, while the surface of the mud stopped moving. Then, for 4 full seconds on the recording, it turned and looked directly into the console camera's lens, close enough that the sensor caught the individual hairs around its jaw before the feed clipped from the heat distortion. Bigfoot did not eat Park. It did not maul the body further. It simply walked away, unhurried, into the dark past the tree line, and every one of us in that room understood, without saying it, that we had just watched it perform for the camera as much as it had killed for any other reason. 4 seconds. I didn't know yet the card still had something longer and worse waiting near the very end. We barricaded the broken wall with a filing cabinet and every spare sandbag in the station, and none of it felt like enough. Kelly kept the rifle trained on the gap the entire time, hands never dropping, while Carter dragged Park's pack inside and went through it for anything useful. I sat on the floor with the seismic laptop still clutched to my chest, queuing up the console footage on a loop, watching that 4-second stare over and over, while the readout spiked every few minutes as something enormous paced, a slow, patient circle around the building, close enough that the concrete under us hummed with every footstep. Kelly made the call that staying put was a losing bet, that a concrete box with 1 door and a hole punched in the back wall was not a fortress anymore. It was a trap with our names already on it. She and Carter tried the north emergency exit first, a steel hatch built into the floor of the equipment closet that led to a maintenance crawl space running out toward the tree line. Carter got the hatch open maybe 18 inches, before a clawed hand shot up out of the darkness below and seized his wrist strong enough that I heard bone grind under the pressure. He wrenched free and slammed the hatch shut, and all three of us stood there listening to something enormous shift and settle in the crawl space beneath the floor, patient as ever, content to wait us out from underneath the one room we thought was safe. It had been down there the entire time we were barricading the back wall.
And it let us find that out on its own schedule, not ours, close enough the whole time that it must have heard every word we said about our next move.
Kelly did not wait for anyone to theorize about how it kept getting ahead of us. She hauled the filing cabinet on top of the hatch and stacked 2 propane tanks on top of that, and none of us said a word about how flimsy that felt against something that had already torn a concrete wall open with one arm. We had maybe 4 minutes before it came back, and Carter used every second of them. He said the snowmobile was still parked outside the east door, but the creature had already circled around to block the direct route, herding us like cattle toward the mushroom field, a stretch of basin where the mineral crust ran only inches thick over pockets of superheated mud. Kelly did not waste time arguing. She rigged the snowmobile's throttle with a length of paracord and a carabiner, clipped a spare helmet cam to the handlebars, and let it go roaring into the dark as a decoy, while the three of us cut east along a narrow ridgeline on foot, boots slipping on frost-slick rock with every stride.
For about 90 seconds, it worked. I heard the engine noise bend and Doppler away from us into the trees. And for one stupid moment, I thought we actually had outsmarted it.
Then the ridge in front of us erupted in steam, ground splitting open in a jagged seam that had not been there a heartbeat earlier. And it was already there, having abandoned the chase entirely and cut straight through the geothermal terrain faster than any of us could have predicted to come up ahead of us instead of behind us. My hip cam caught the exact second the ground opened, and later, when the snowmobile was finally recovered 3 miles down the service road, its helmet cam had recorded the whole 90 seconds of empty trail behind it. It had never chased the decoy at all. It had known which target was real from the first second. Then Bigfoot stood silhouetted against the faint green ribbon of aurora, easily 9 feet tall against the low sky, fur smoking faintly at the tips from whatever furnace it had just walked through, and it beat its chest once, twice, 3 times, a sound like someone hammering a steel drum, not as a threat display, but as something closer to a signal. The seismic monitor, still strapped to my pack, screeched with feedback loud enough to make my ears ring, and the entire ridge began to vibrate under our boots, loose scree rattling down into the fissures on either side of us. My hip cam held the shot the whole time, silhouette against sky, clearer than anything I had gotten yet. Kelly grabbed my sleeve and hauled me sideways off the main path onto a narrower spur of rock, shouting for Carter to follow. But Bigfoot was already closing the gap between us in 3 enormous strides, each footfall punching divots into frozen ground that should have been solid enough to hold a full-grown moose. I could feel the heat radiating off it even from 15 feet away, a wrongness in the cold night air, like standing too close to an oven door. Carter fired the last 3 rounds in his sidearm as it closed, and this time, one shot found the soft tissue under its jaw. My camera caught the wound itself, dark and wet, in the clearest close detail of its face I had gotten all night. Bigfoot jerked its head back and let out a sound between a bark and a groan. The first real wound any of us had managed to land, and for a second, it actually slowed. That second cost us nothing and bought us everything. 3 full strides of distance, while it shook its head like a dog shedding water, dark fluid spattering across the snow in a wide arc. Then it dropped back onto all 4s, moving faster that way than any of us could sprint upright, closing the gap again before Carter had even finished reloading. Carter grabbed both our arms and screamed for us to move, and we ran along a spine of rock, barely 3 feet wide, with boiling fissures hissing open on either side. Bigfoot stomped once more, a blow that landed like a car crash, and the ridge cracked directly beneath us in a line running straight for our feet. Kelly and I threw ourselves forward onto stable stone, skidding hard against granite. Carter did not make it. His back foot went straight through into a fissure packed with superheated mud, and the sound he made as it closed around his calf was not something I can describe without my hands shaking even now. Bigfoot walked toward him without hurrying, wading through sludge, coated its ankles, and hissed against its fur, completely unbothered by heat that was already cooking Carter's leg through his boot. Carter knew what was coming, and he did not waste breath begging. He shoved his radio and the emergency beacon into my hands and told me, fast and desperate to keep the camera running no matter what happened next, that the footage was the only thing that would make anyone believe what this thing actually was and what it actually did, and that I owed it to Sarah and Park to get it out of this basin even if he didn't make it out with me. He did not finish the sentence. Bigfoot closed one enormous hand around his skull, lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing while his boots kicked uselessly at the air, and held him over a vent, screaming steam until he stopped struggling. My hip cam held the shot, unsteady but unbroken, all the way through. It dropped his body into the snow and turned toward Kelly and me, and this time it did not roar. It raised one long, clawed finger and pointed directly at the camera, still clipped to my chest strap. Not at my face, not at my hands, at the lens itself, and held that pose for a full 2 seconds before finally moving again. On the footage, slowed down later, that gesture reads less like a threat and more like something checking that a job was being done correctly. We ran while it was still standing there, ducking behind a frozen waterfall that hid a narrow crevasse Carter had mentioned once as an old survey route he had never actually walked himself. The crevasse opened into a shallow cave barely tall enough to stand in, and what I found inside made my knees buckle. The floor was covered in gear, stacked in low, deliberate piles rather than scattered. Rusted compasses, cracked badges from decades ago, some still pinned to shreds of canvas vest. Backpacks from 3 different eras, some rotted to canvas scraps that crumbled when Kelly's boot brushed them, some barely a year old with the straps still intact. A rifle stock with no barrel. A child's stuffed animal, filthy and half melted along one side, which the camera lingered on a beat too long before I made myself pan away. This was not a den. It was a boneyard. Everything Bigfoot had ever taken off the people it killed, piled here the way a dog buries evidence at the edge of its territory. Decades of it, layered like sediment. Kelly counted at least 11 separate sets of remains in that cave without saying the word remains out loud. Just a slow, grim head count as her headlamp passed over boot soles and belt buckles half buried in the dirt floor. None of it had been touched by scavengers, not one bone dragged off or gnawed, which told us plainly enough that nothing else on this mountain came near this cave. While Kelly counted, I sat against the wall and did the only thing that felt useful, which was cue up every clip my hip cam had caught that night and watch them back in order, fast, hunting for a pattern instead of an explanation. And there it was, once I knew to look for it. In clip after clip, no matter what it was doing, killing Sarah, throwing Park, standing over Carter, its head found the nearest camera before it did anything else, every single time. Like it was checking that the shot was framed before it acted. It was not hunting us at random. It was staging every death for something with a lens.
I had maybe 10 seconds to process that before Bigfoot filled the crevice entrance.
It blocked every inch of daylight. Steam rolling off fur, soaked from wading through the burning runoff of the waterfall above us to corner us in here. It ducked its head under the low rock ceiling and advanced 2 slow steps, forcing Kelly and me back against the pile of gear until there was nowhere left to retreat. Kelly did not hesitate. She raised the flare gun and fired it directly into its face at close range. For the first time since I had laid eyes on it, Bigfoot roared in something that sounded like genuine pain, a sound that shook loose dust from the cave ceiling, staggering backward and clawing at its own eyes, while the flare sputtered against the stone floor between us. In that flare light, at that range, my hip cam recorded 4 full seconds of the clearest footage anyone had gotten of it all night. Close enough to count individual hairs, close enough to see the exact moment its expression changed from calm to something that actually looked like pain. It did not stay stunned for long. Within seconds, it lunged forward again, blind and furious. One massive arm sweeping across the cave and catching Kelly across the shoulder, throwing her into the pile of rusted gear, hard enough that I heard the air leave her lungs. She scrambled upright, blood running from a gash above her eyebrow, and grabbed a jagged length of pipe from the debris, jamming it into the meat of the creature's forearm as it swung toward her again. Bigfoot bellowed and yanked back, the pipe still lodged in its arm, and for one terrifying second, its full attention swung toward her instead of me.
This is the part of the footage nobody who has seen it can stop talking about it.
The resolution is clear enough to count individual hairs on its arm as the flare light catches it square in the face. You can see the exact moment it registers pain. You can see it is not an animal reacting on pure instinct. There is something behind those eyes calculating what to do next. And that calculation is the most terrifying 4 seconds of footage I have ever reviewed, frame by frame, at 2 a.m, unable to look away. But even then, some part of me already knew this wasn't going to be the last thing my camera caught that night either. I had the seismic speaker rig still strapped to my pack, salvaged out of habit more than planned, and I realized in that instant it could broadcast the same rhythmic pulses Bigfoot had used against the station's foundation, except reversed and amplified back at full volume. My fingers were shaking so badly it took 2 tries to get the cable seated, with Bigfoot already turning back toward me, one hand still clamped around the pipe jutting from its forearm. Kelly screamed at me to do it, and I hit the switch. The blast that came out of those speakers was not sound so much as pressure. A frequency built from its own signal turned into a weapon against it, and the effect was instant. It clutched its skull and staggered backward into the cave wall, and cracks split up the stone behind it from the sheer force of the resonance, dust and small rocks raining down over all 3 of us. It swiped blindly in my direction, close enough that I felt the wind off its claws against my jacket, close enough that my hip cam's lens actually grazed a strand of its fur as I dropped, and I threw myself sideways into Kelly, both of us hitting the ground as a chunk of ceiling the size of a car door crashed down where I had been standing.
For one heartbeat, I thought we actually had beaten it.
Kelly did not wait to see if the sound alone would finish it. While Bigfoot was still staggering, both hands clamped over its skull, she scrambled across the cave floor and yanked the pipe free from its forearm, driving it a second time into the same wound as deep as her strength would let her. Bigfoot roared again, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere far below its chest, and swept one arm blindly through the space where she had been standing a half second earlier. She rolled clear, hit the cave wall hard, and stayed down, chest heaving, out of strikes and out of pipe. It did not flee like a wounded animal would. It straightened instead, and for one final second, while the flare's last light guttered against the stone, it turned its full face toward my hip cam, close enough that the entire frame filled with nothing but its features. That single shot is the one that changed everything. Later, when I finally sat down to review the footage properly, in it, its eyes are not on me. They are not on Kelly, bleeding on the cave floor. They are locked, precisely and unmistakably, on the small black lens clipped to my chest, pupils contracting hard against the flare light, the way human eye does when it is deliberately holding focus on something close. It is not the blank stare of an animal caught in a light. It is the look of something that understands exactly what a camera is, has understood it the entire night, and in that last second chose, on purpose, not to destroy the one that had been recording it since the moment it killed Sarah. Then it covered its face with both arms and retreated backward into the steam pouring off the waterfall, and it was gone. Kelly and I made it out of that basin by sunrise, dragging Carter's beacon and radio and a memory card full of the clearest Bigfoot footage anyone has ever captured.
Search teams found nothing when they finally reached the ridge. No body, no tracks past the tree line, nothing but scorched earth and a fissure that geologists, well, still cannot fully explain the depth of it.